The old woman's hands, elegant with the ghost of a past life, trembled on the starched white linen. Her son's voice, a blade of polished steel, sliced through the hushed reverence of the restaurant. And Ilara had only the space of a single, held breath to decide if her dream of a new life for her grandmother was worth the price of another human being's soul. The choice she made in that instant would either see her thrown out onto the unforgiving streets of Chicago or ignite a quiet revolution at a single table, a revolution that would redefine the meaning of wealth, home, and dignity. The silence in Aurelia, a bastion of Michelin-starred ambition on Chicago's Gold Coast, was a carefully curated commodity. It was the sound of money, of power so assured it had no need to raise its voice. Crystal glasses chimed with the delicacy of wind chimes, and the muted conversations were a low hum, the sound of empires being casually built and dismantled between bites of seared foie gras. But at table 17, nestled in a discreet alcove, the silence was different. It was a suffocating void, a black hole of unspoken history and simmering resentment. Amara Croft, at 72, sat with the ramrod posture of a woman who had once commanded ballrooms. Her sightless eyes, the color of faded denim, were fixed on a point somewhere over her son's shoulder, seeing nothing of the opulence around her, but perhaps everything of the emptiness before her. Glaucoma, aggressive and swift, had plunged her into darkness 5 years ago, a final, cruel theft after a lifetime of other, more subtle losses. Her dress was a simple but exquisitely cut sheath of midnight blue silk, a relic from a life she no longer lived, her silver hair coiled in a chignon she could only remember by touch. Across from her sat her son, Julian Croft. At 45, he was the physical embodiment of a hostile takeover. His suit, a bespoke creation from Savile Row, was a work of architectural precision. The watch on his wrist was a Patek Philippe that cost more than the car Ilara drove. He had inherited his mother's sharp, aristocratic features, but had weaponized them, his face a mask of cold, transactional appraisal. He hadn't just built a fortune in real estate development. He had raised history, replacing cherished neighborhood landmarks with gleaming, soulless towers of glass and steel. The press had nicknamed him the Eraser for his uncanny ability to wipe the past off the map. He treated the moniker as a compliment. Tonight was the anniversary of his father's death, a day Amara observed with quiet sorrow and Julian with resentful obligation. He had delegated the reservation to his third assistant, and his presence at the table was as reluctant and temporary as a storm cloud. He tapped impatiently at his phone, his thumb scrolling through market analyses from Tokyo, his attention 1,000 miles away from the woman sitting opposite him. Amara's hand, guided by memory and a tremor of uncertainty, found her water glass. She lifted it to her lips, the movement precise and practiced, a small act of defiance against the chaos of her new world. The sounds of the restaurant swirled around her, the distant laughter, the clink of a dropped fork, the whisper of a waiter's shoes on the polished floor, a symphony of a life she could hear but no longer participate in. She felt like a photograph fading in the sun. From across the dining room, 24-year-old Ilara Hassan watched table 17 with a knot tightening in her stomach. She had been a server at Aurelia for 3 years, a grueling, high-pressure job that was the only path she could see to her goal. Every dollar she saved, every punishing double shift she worked, was for her teta, her grandmother. Back in Beirut, she was saving for the plane ticket, for the prohibitively expensive medical visa, for the surgery that might save her grandmother's own failing eyesight. Ilara had learned the intricate dance of fine dining, how to anticipate a diner's need for more water before they did, how to describe the notes in a vintage Bordeaux with authority, how to become an invisible, efficient presence. But she couldn't remain invisible to the scene at table 17. The older woman's profound loneliness was a physical presence, a cold draft in the warm room. The son's blatant disregard was more than just rudeness. It was a form of erasure, as complete and final as the buildings he demolished. Ilara had seen her share of arrogant, wealthy patrons, but the chilling indifference of this man toward his own mother struck a deeply personal chord. David, the maitre d', approached her, his face a mask of professional calm. "Ilara, table 17 is yours. Mr. Croft requested our most senior server. He's particular." Ilara nodded, smoothing the front of her crisp black apron. Tucked inside its pocket was a small, worn notebook. In it, she didn't just write down orders. She scribbled observations, phrases in different languages, lines of poetry her teta had taught her. Tonight, a premonition whispered that she would need more than the restaurant's script. Before she even took a step, she found herself uncapping her pen and writing a single word in elegant Arabic script in her notebook. Sabah. Patience. As she approached the table, Ilara felt the familiar ache of empathy. She saw her own teta in Amara Croft's dignified solitude. In her family, in her culture, elders were the roots of the tree. To disrespect them was to poison the very ground you stood on. She had no inkling that this single table, this one night, was a convergence point, a place where her past, her present, and her future were about to collide with devastating force. Sometimes, the most powerful act in a world of noise is to give a voice to the silenced. "Good evening," Ilara said, her voice a calm anchor in the turbulent silence at the table. "Welcome to Aurelia. My name is Ilara, and it will be my pleasure to care for you this evening." Julian Croft did not look up from his phone. Amara, however, turned her head toward the sound, a faint, almost imperceptible shift in her posture, like a plant turning toward a distant sun. Finally, Julian's gaze lifted. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, performed a swift, dismissive inventory of Ilara, from her neatly tied hair to her polished shoes. It was the same look he gave a property he was about to condemn. He gestured with a flick of his wrist toward his mother. "My mother is blind," he stated, the words delivered with the emotional resonance of a weather report. "She can't read your pretentious menu. You will need to explain it to her. Every single dish, every ingredient, and not just the English. She claims to miss the old country so much, so you will describe it all to her in perfect, classical Arabic. Don't stumble. Don't mispronounce a thing. I expect fluency." The demand was so specific, so bizarrely cruel, that it hung in the air, vibrating with malice. It was a test designed for failure, a trap laid with casual contempt. Amara's face, already pale, lost another shade of color. "Julian, please, that's not necessary," she whispered, her hand fluttering at her throat. "The young lady is busy. I can just have the salmon." "No, Mother." Julian's voice was low, but each word was a perfectly formed shard of ice. "You wanted to come out. You wanted to reminisce about the glories of Beirut. So, we will do this properly. Let's see if the old ways are as wonderful as you remember them." His words were a performance, a public flagellation disguised as filial duty. Ilara watched, her training screaming at her to nod, to apologize for an inability she was assumed to have, to offer a simple English description. But her heart saw something else. It saw the way Amara's shoulders slumped, the way her fingers twisted the linen napkin in her lap into a knot of shame. Ilara had been raised on stories of Beirut, the Paris of the Middle East, a city of poets and artists, of unimaginable beauty and profound sorrow. To hear it invoked as a tool of humiliation ignited a slow, protective fire within her. "Of course," Ilara said, her voice betraying nothing of the storm inside her. She moved to stand beside Amara, a subtle shift that changed the dynamics of the table, creating a small shield around the older woman. "It would be my honor to guide you through the menu, Mrs. Croft, in any language you prefer." Julian's phone buzzed. A scowl darkened his features. "I have to take this. It's Hong Kong." He stood, his chair scraping back harshly. "Make sure she orders. She hardly eats. It's a waste of my time." He strode toward the lobby, his voice already barking orders into the phone before he was 10 feet away. The moment he was gone, Amara seemed to shrink. The regal posture collapsed, leaving a fragile, tired old woman in its place. "I am so terribly sorry," she murmured to the empty air. "He is a good son. Just preoccupied. Important things." Ilara did something she had never done in 3 years at Aurelia. She pulled a nearby chair slightly out and perched on its edge, bringing herself to Amara's level. It was a flagrant breach of protocol, but protocol felt like a distant, irrelevant concept in the face of such profound sadness. "Mrs. Croft, there is nothing to apologize for," Ilara said, her voice soft and low. "And there is no rush. Your son is busy with Hong Kong, but you and we are right here, in Chicago, and we have all the time in the world. May I?" She gently took the heavy, leather-bound menu. Amara turned her face toward Ilara, and a flicker of curiosity, the first spark of life, entered her clouded eyes. "That's very kind. Your accent, it's not from here." "No," Ilara smiled, the warmth carrying in her voice. "My family is from Lebanon, from Akrafie in Beirut." Amara's breath caught in a tiny, sharp gasp. Her hand flew to her lips. "Akrafie," she whispered, the name a prayer on her tongue. "I grew up on Sursok Street. My father was a professor at the university. We had a garden with jasmine vines that climbed all the way to my bedroom window. My teta, my grandmother, she says the jasmine in Beirut smells like nowhere else on earth," Ilara replied, her heart aching with a sudden, fierce connection to this stranger. "She is right," Amara said, and for the first time, a genuine, though fragile, smile touched her lips. "What is your name, my dear?" "Ilara, Ilara Hassan." "Ilara," Amara repeated, tasting the name. "A beautiful, strong name. You honor your family by working so hard." Her smile faded. "My Julian, he used to be proud of our name, of our heritage. Before he decided it was something to be discarded, like old furniture." Across the restaurant, Julian paced near the entrance, a caged panther in a bespoke suit. He was a man who saw heritage as a liability, a set of inconvenient memories that couldn't be leveraged or sold. Ilara made her choice. It wasn't about her job anymore. It wasn't about the money for her teta, not in this moment. It was about retrieving something precious that had been deliberately thrown away. It was about restoring a little piece of a world that had been erased. She leaned closer to Amara, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Mrs. Croft, Amara, your son requested a description in Arabic. Shall we give him one he will never forget?" A single tear traced a path through the fine powder on Amara's cheek. She nodded, a small, hopeful gesture. "And so," Ilara began. She didn't open the menu to read the French and English descriptions. She closed her eyes for a second, summoning the cadence of her grandmother's voice, the scent of her mother's kitchen, the soul of a language that was as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. "Let us begin, not with appetizers, but with a memory," Ilara said, her voice shifting, taking on the lyrical, melodic quality of spoken Arabic. She spoke the language not as a server reciting a list, but as a poet painting a scene. First, they offer something they call heirloom tomato carpaccio, a simple name. But let us call it Bustan ol Shams, the Garden of the Sun. Amara's head tilted, her entire being focused on Ilara's words. Imagine a plate, cool like marble from a Beiruti courtyard, Ilara continued in flowing Arabic. Upon it lie slices of tomato, so thin they are like stained glass. Not the pale, sad tomatoes of the supermarket, but jewels born of summer soil. Some are the deep red of a sunset over the Mediterranean. Others are striped with the gold of the cedars, the green of the Chuf mountains. The chef scatters leaves of fresh basil, rihan, a word that itself is a perfume. Each leaf carries the scent of a sun-warmed garden after a morning rain. I can almost smell it, Amara whispered back in Arabic, her voice rusty from disuse, but filled with a dawning wonder. Ilara smiled, her confidence growing. And upon this garden he places burrata. But we will not call it that. We will call it Kalb al-Halib, the heart of the milk. It is a sphere of cheese, white as the snows on Mount Sanin. The outside is firm, but when your fork touches it, a river of cream, rich and sweet, flows out to embrace the tomatoes. It tastes of pastoral fields and a simpler time. Amara's hands, once trembling with anxiety, now rested peacefully on the table. Her fingers were uncurled, her posture relaxed. And the final touch, Ilara's voice dropped lower, is a drizzle of aged balsamic. But it is more than that. It is Dumu al-Karm, tears of the vine. A syrup aged for 30 years, dark as a moonless night, sweet as a forgotten love song, with a sharpness that awakens the soul. It is the taste of both joy and sorrow, the story of a long life in a single drop. Amara's eyes were closed, but she was not shutting out the world. She was seeing it, perhaps more clearly than she had in years. "It sounds like poetry," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "Food has been only texture and temperature to me for so long. Just fuel." "Food should never be just fuel," Ilara said gently. "It is memory. It is home." Julian returned then, sliding into his chair with an air of irritation. "Have you ordered yet?" "That took forever." He glanced at Ilara. "Well, did you manage to stumble through a few Arabic words for her?" "We are deciding now, my son," Amara said, and her voice held a new note. It was not the timid whisper of before. It was quiet, but it was firm, infused with a rediscovered dignity. Julian shot her a sharp look, surprised by the change in tone, but his phone buzzed again, and his attention was immediately recaptured. Ilara continued, her gaze fixed on Amara. "For the main course there is one dish I believe you will love. They call it pan-seared scallops." "I used to adore seafood," Amara said wistfully. "My husband, your father," she said, her voice now directed toward Julian, who paid her no mind, "would take me to Byblos. We would eat fish straight from the sea, grilled over coals with lemon and garlic." Ilara's heart clenched. She saw Julian typing furiously, oblivious to the precious memory his mother was offering him. "These scallops," Ilara said, drawing Amara's attention back, "are not from Byblos, but they hold their own story. Imagine 5 perfect scallops, the size of a silver dollar, seared in browned butter until their edges are the color of caramelized honey, a deep, beautiful gold. We will call them Lulu al-Bahr, pearls of the sea." Amara's face was transformed. The weary lines seemed to have softened. She looked as if she were listening to music only she could hear. "They rest upon a bed of saffron risotto. Think of it as a field of gold. each grain of rice plump and creamy, infused with the flavor of saffron, that spice more precious than gold itself, which tastes of sunshine and faraway lands. And woven through this gold are green peas, sweet and tender, like tiny emeralds. The entire dish is a treasure chest of flavors. "Stop," Amara said, holding up a hand. Elara paused, her heart skipping a beat, afraid she had gone too far. But Amara was smiling, a true, radiant smile that lit up her face. "I will have that, the pearls of the sea. My dear, you have made me hungry again. Not just for food, but for life." Julian looked up, his expression one of pure annoyance. "Fine, scallops. I'll have the New York strip, rare." He hadn't even looked at the menu, but Elara barely registered his order. She was watching a single, silent tear roll down Amara Croft's cheek. It was not a tear of sadness, it was a tear of homecoming. As Elara walked toward the kitchen to place the order, she felt a presence fall into step beside her. It was an older gentleman from table 15, a man with kind eyes and a tweed jacket who had been dining alone. "Young lady," he said in a low, conspiratorial voice, "I was a diplomat in Beirut for 10 years. My Arabic is rusty, but I know poetry when I hear it. What you are doing for that woman, it is a kindness of the highest order." Elara felt a blush creep up her neck. "Thank you, sir." Her son, however, the man's eyes flickered toward Julian, is a barbarian. The encounter bolstered her. In the kitchen, she spoke quietly to Chef Dubois, a temperamental genius who usually terrorized the waitstaff. But when Elara explained the situation, the blind woman, the cruel son, the request for Arabic, the chef's stern facade softened. "I see," he said, his French accent thick. "A woman who has forgotten the joy of food. We cannot have this." He pointed a finger at Elara. "You," with the words, "you have done your part. Now, I will do mine. Her dish will be perfect." When Elara returned, Julian was on his phone again, this time on speaker, the disembodied voice of a lawyer discussing zoning variances echoing across the table. Amara sat in a cocoon of silence, patiently waiting, her brief moment of joy already fading under the relentless barrage of her son's indifference. Elara approached with the bread basket. Instead of just setting it down, she leaned close to Amara, her voice a private murmur against the lawyer's drone. "Amara, may I describe the bread?" Amara's face lit up. "Please. Here." Elara guided the woman's hand to the basket. "Feel this. It is a baguette, the crust so crisp it crackles when you touch it. It will sound like walking on autumn leaves. Inside, it is soft as a cloud." Amara broke off a piece, and the crust made a distinct, satisfying crackle. A small secret smile played on her lips. "And this," Elara guided her hand again, "is a slice of focaccia, spongy and soft, studded with rosemary and sea salt. It smells of the earth, of pine trees and the sea." "You have a rare gift, Elara," Amara said quietly. "You make the world visible again. Mother, must you chatter with the help?" Julian's voice cut in, sharp and cold. He had ended his call. "I'm trying to concentrate." The word struck Amara like a physical blow. The light in her face extinguished. The smile vanished. She flinched as if she'd been slapped. Elara felt a surge of white-hot anger. She straightened up, her professional mask firmly in place, but her eyes, when they met Julian's, were not submissive. "My apologies, Mr. Croft," she said, her tone level and professional, but with an undercurrent of steel he was too arrogant to detect. "I will return with your appetizers." As she turned away, she heard Amara's heartbroken whisper, "I'm sorry, Julian. I didn't mean to be a bother." You're not a bother, Mother. You just need to remember your place. Ilara's hands were shaking as she retrieved the plates from the kitchen. This wasn't about bad manners anymore. This was about cruelty. It was about a man systematically stripping his own mother of her voice, her memories, and her dignity, right in the middle of one of Chicago's finest restaurants. She served the appetizers, once again kneeling beside Amara to describe the Garden of the Sun on her plate, mapping it out for her like a familiar landscape. The tomatoes are at the top of the plate, like a crescent moon. The heart of the milk is in the center. Amara ate with a newfound reverence, her movements slow and deliberate, savoring each bite. Julian consumed his own oyster appetizer with mechanical efficiency, his phone once again in his hand. As Amara finished, a quiet moment of peace settled over her. She looked happy, and it was this small, fragile happiness that Julian Croft seemed determined to shatter. The main courses arrived, works of art on porcelain. Chef Dubois had indeed outdone himself. Amara's scallops were seared to a perfect, glistening mahogany, nestled in their golden bed of risotto. Ilara set down Julian's steak. He grunted without looking up. Then she knelt beside Amara. "Amara," she began softly, "your pearls of the sea have arrived. Chef Dubois said he made this dish with you in mind. He said joy is the most important ingredient." Amara's hand instinctively went to her heart. "For me?" "For you," Ilara confirmed. She began to describe the placement of each scallop, the scent of the saffron, the texture of the risotto. She was painting a final, beautiful picture. "For God's sake, is this necessary?" Julian's voice cracked like a whip. "This entire floor show. Just let the woman eat her food so we can leave." Amara froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Ilara rose slowly, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and righteous fury. "I am simply trying to provide the experience you requested, sir." "I requested a translation, not a therapy session," he snapped, his voice rising, drawing stares from adjacent tables. "You've been kneeling at our table all night like some kind of saint. It's pathetic." "Julian, stop it," Amara pleaded, her voice trembling. "She has been a blessing. She has been a nuisance. I am paying a fortune for this meal, and I expect professional service, not this emotional spectacle." Ilara looked at Amara's face. It was a mask of utter devastation. The light she had so carefully kindled was gone, smothered by her son's casual brutality. In its place was the familiar, vacant look of resignation. And in that moment, something inside Ilara broke. It was the dam of years of polite deference, of swallowing insults, of smiling through clenched teeth. She thought of her Teta, growing frail and old so far away. She thought of the quiet dignity of people like Amara, so easily dismissed by the loud, the rich, and the cruel. She thought of the words she had written in her notebook. "Sabe, patience." Her patience had just run out. She stood to her full height, her small frame suddenly imbued with an unshakable strength. She looked Julian Croft directly in his cold, calculating eyes. "Mr. Croft," she said, her voice not loud, but clear and resonant, carrying through the now silent dining room. "I was not performing therapy. I was offering your mother the respect you have denied her all evening." The gasp that went through the room was audible. Julian's face turned a mottled shade of red. "Excuse me? You are fired. Your mother," Ilara continued, her voice gaining power, "is not an inconvenience to be managed. She is not an obligation on your calendar. She is a woman from a city of poets who grew jasmine in her garden. She is a woman who fell in love and raised a son. And tonight, on the anniversary of her husband's death, She tried to share a memory with that son, and he ignored her to check his stock portfolio. The string quartet faltered into silence. Every diner, every server was frozen, watching the drama unfold. Julian shot to his feet, his chair screeching against the marble floor. "How dare you! Do you have any idea who I am? I will destroy this restaurant. I will have your name blacklisted in every establishment in this city. I know exactly who you are." Elara's voice was steady, though her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. "You are Julian Croft, the eraser, a man so skilled at tearing down old things to build new ones that you decided to do the same thing to your own soul. You've erased your name, your history, your language, and now you're trying to erase your mother." She took a step closer, her voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. "You demanded a description in perfect Arabic. You thought it would be a punishment, a humiliation. You used your mother's own culture as a weapon against her. You thought I would fail. You thought she would be shamed. But you underestimated her. And you underestimated me." She glanced at Amara, whose face was now streaked with silent tears. "You see, Mr. Croft, money can buy buildings. It can buy silence. It can buy obedience, but it cannot buy a memory of jasmine in a Beiruti garden. It cannot buy the taste of home, and it cannot buy you the decency you threw away when you decided your heritage was a liability." A profound, absolute hush descended. It was broken by a single, clear voice from table 15. "Bravo." It was the old diplomat. He stood up slowly, his napkin still in his hand, and began to applaud, not loudly, but with a steady, deliberate rhythm. Then a woman at another table stood and joined him. And then another. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was on its feet, the sound of their applause washing over the room, a thunderous rebuke of cruelty and a resounding affirmation of courage. Julian Croft stood, exposed and utterly alone, in the center of the storm, and Amara Croft sat with her hands pressed to her face, her shoulders shaking with sobs, as a 24-year-old waitress gave her back the world she thought she had lost forever. The applause subsided, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. The air was thick with unspoken judgment. Julian Croft remained standing, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions, rage, disbelief, and underneath it all, a deep, unfamiliar fissure of public shame. He was a man who orchestrated his life from behind layers of corporate armor and legal firewalls. To be stripped bare like this in a room full of strangers by a woman he considered less than nothing was a violation of the natural order of his world. "This is an outrage," he finally managed to say, his voice strained. "I am a patron of this establishment, and I have been insulted. Julian." The single word from his mother cut through his bluster. It was quiet, yet it possessed the authority of a judge's gavel. He stopped, turning to look at her, as if seeing her for the first time. She had lowered her hands from her face. Her sightless eyes, shimmering with tears, were aimed directly at him. Her expression was not one of weakness, but of profound, sorrowful strength. "Mother, this waitress was wildly inappropriate. I am handling it." "No," Amara said, her voice gaining resonance with every word. "She was not inappropriate. She was honest. She said the things I have been too afraid to say for 5 years. Do you hear me, Julian? She gave me back my own voice." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "You bring me to this beautiful, expensive place to mark the day your father died. A man who loved his heritage, who taught you your first words in Arabic. And you use that same language to try and hurt me, to remind me of all I've lost. But this young woman, this Elara, She used it to help me remember all that I still have inside me. Julian's face went slack. The anger was replaced by a pale, stunned confusion. That's not what I was just... What were you doing, Julian? Amara pressed, her voice trembling with the force of long-suppressed grief. Proving how far you've come from the little boy who loved my kibbe. Proving that you're no longer the son of immigrants. When you erase our past, you erase me. You erase your father. You leave me in the dark in more ways than one. The confrontation had become intensely private, yet the entire room was its unwilling audience. David, the maître d'hôtel, stood near the kitchen entrance, his arms crossed, making no move to intervene. He was letting this play out. Elara stood rooted to the spot, the adrenaline beginning to recede, leaving a cold dread in its place. She had won the moral victory, but the practical consequences were still terrifying. Her job, her savings, her Teta's future, it all hung in the balance. Julian seemed to deflate, the aggressive posture seeping out of him. He looked around the room at the faces of the other diners and saw no support, only condemnation and pity. He sank back into his chair, the bespoke suit suddenly looking like a hollow costume. I work so hard, he stammered, the words sounding weak and hollow, even to his own ears. Everything I do, it's to provide, to make sure you have the best of everything. I don't want the best of everything, Amara's voice broke. I just want my son. She reached a trembling hand across the table, her fingers searching for him in the darkness. I am so lonely, Julian. For a long, agonizing moment, he did nothing. He stared at her outstretched hand as if it were a foreign object. Then, slowly, hesitantly, he reached out and took it. His grip was clumsy, unfamiliar. It was the first time they had touched in years. Elara quietly backed away, melting into the shadows near a service station. She caught the eye of the old diplomat, Mr. Sterling, who gave her a slow, respectful nod. As she passed other tables, diners murmured their support. "Thank you," one woman whispered, squeezing her arm. "That was for all of us who have ever been made to feel small." In the sanctuary of the kitchen, Chef Dubois was waiting. He held a clean towel in his hands. "You have the fire of a revolutionary," he said, his usual gruffness gone, "and the heart of a poet. You will always have a place in my kitchen." The words were the highest praise he could offer, and they brought tears to Elara's eyes. She spent the next 20 minutes in the kitchen, her body shaking as the emotional dam finally broke. Other servers gave her space, their expressions a mixture of awe and concern. Eventually, David came to find her. "Elara," he said gently, "Table 17 is asking for the applause when it died, left a vacuum more profound than any silence that had preceded it." The sound was sucked from the room, leaving only a ringing in Elara's ears and the frantic, wild thumping of her own heart. In that void, every tiny noise was magnified, the nervous cough from a nearby table, the distant, panicked whisper of a busboy, the scrape of Julian Croft's chair as he finally, heavily, sank back into it. He was no longer the eraser, a force of nature. He was just a man, publicly dismantled, his bespoke armor pierced and hanging in tatters around him. He stared at the untouched New York strip on his plate as if it were an unsolvable equation. His face, usually a mask of sharp, predatory angles, had softened into a ruin of confusion and a shame so deep it seemed to physically weigh him down. He was a man who navigated the world through transactions, leverage, and control. This raw, unquantifiable wave of human judgment was a foreign language for which he had no translator. It was Amara who spoke first, her voice cutting through the suffocating tension. "Julian." The word was not an accusation. It was not a plea. It was a simple, unadorned statement of fact, a name spoken to reclaim the man who wore it. He flinched, his gaze slowly lifting from his plate to her face. For the first time all evening, he truly saw her. He saw the tracks of tears on her powdered cheeks, the tremor in her hands, the immense, heartbreaking strength in her sightless eyes that were fixed on the space where his soul ought to be. "Mother," he began, his voice a hoarse rasp, the polished steel blade now pitted with rust. "This waitress, she had no right. This is a private matter." Was it? Amara's voice was quiet, yet it carried the weight of a collapsing cathedral. "Was it private when you used my language to wound me in a room full of strangers? Was it private when you made my blindness a spectacle for your own cruel game? For 5 years I have lived in the dark, Julian. But tonight, you made me feel invisible. And this young woman..." She turned her head toward where she sensed Ilara stood, a human compass seeking true north. "She made me seen." The words landed on him, not like blows, but like stones dropped into a deep, still well, the ripples spreading through years of neglect. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The usual justifications, the pressure of work, the demands on his time, the necessity of providing, all felt like ash in his mouth. They were the excuses of a man who had forgotten what he was providing for. I built an empire for you," he whispered, the words a desperate, failing defense. "So you would never want for anything. I have the best doctors, the most beautiful apartment, clothes I can no longer see." Amara's voice trembled, cracking with the agony of a truth held back for too long. "I have everything money can buy, and nothing I truly want. I don't want an empire, Habibi. I just want my son." She reached her hand across the vast, white expanse of the tablecloth. It was a terrifying bridge across a chasm of their own making. Her fingers, elegant and trembling, searched the empty space between them. "I am so terribly lonely, Julian." He stared at her hand. It was the hand that had once checked his forehead for fever, guided his fingers as he learned to write, held him when his father died. Now it looked fragile, alien, a relic from a past he had systematically demolished. For a long, agonizing moment, he did nothing. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a slow, shuddering movement that felt as if he were lifting 1,000 pounds, he reached out and took it. His large, manicured hand, a hand that signed billion-dollar deals and leveled city blocks, was clumsy and hesitant as it closed around her delicate fingers. It was the first time they had touched with any meaning in what felt like a lifetime. The contact was an electric shock, a jolt of memory and loss that made his throat tighten. Ilara felt like an intruder on a moment of profound, painful intimacy. She began to back away, a ghost fading from the scene she had created. As she moved, she caught David's eye. The maître d' gave a barely perceptible nod, a silent message of absolution and respect. The war was over. The casualties were still being counted. She retreated to the relative chaos of the kitchen, her body finally succumbing to the aftershocks of the confrontation. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Chef Dubois, a man known for his volcanic temper, approached her quietly and pressed a glass of water into her hands. "In France," he said, his thick accent softening the words, "we say that a meal can be a revolution. Tonight, you are Joan of Arc in an apron." He placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. "Whatever happens, Ilara, you have a place here. You have honor." The validation from this difficult, brilliant man was so unexpected it brought a fresh wave of tears to her eyes. She spent the next half hour in the staff break room, trying to piece her composure back together, while the sounds of the restaurant slowly returned to their normal rhythm. The string quartet began to play again, a tentative, melancholic Brahms. Life, it seemed, went on. Eventually, David found her. "They're asking for the check." Ilara's stomach twisted into a cold knot. "Is he angry?" "I don't know what he is," David admitted, his professional mask back in place, but his eyes holding a new warmth. "But he's not the same man who walked in here 2 hours ago. They've been sitting there, just holding hands, not saying a word." With a deep, fortifying breath, Ilara printed the bill and walked back into the dining room. The atmosphere had shifted. The air of performative wealth had been replaced by something more subdued, more human. The other diners averted their eyes, giving the family at table 17 a bubble of privacy. Julian looked up as she approached. The bruising shame was still there, but it was overlaid with a raw, painful clarity. The cold, winter sky eyes now looked like a frozen lake beginning to thaw. He didn't speak, merely took the leather bill folder from her. He placed his black American Express card inside without a glance at the total. While he signed, Amara turned her face toward Ilara. A fragile, watery smile touched her lips. "Ilara," she said, her voice stronger now. "My son has just made me a promise. He is going to find a tutor to help him remember the language his father taught him." Ilara's heart ached. "That's a beautiful promise, Mrs. Croft." "And," Amara continued, her smile widening, "he will come to my home every Sunday. I am going to teach him how to make kibbeh nayeh, the way my mother taught me. His hands are clumsy, but his heart, I think, still remembers." "Please," Amara said, her hand squeezing her son's. "Call me Amara." Julian slid the bill folder back across the table. When Ilara opened it later, she would see that he had left a $5,000 tip on a $400 meal. But he wasn't finished. He pulled a checkbook from his jacket, an archaic, powerful object in a digital world. He wrote quickly, tore out the check, folded it, and pushed it toward her. "This is for you," he said, his voice low and gruff, the words scraping their way out. "For services rendered. A lesson in translation." Ilara's fingers trembled as she took the folded paper. She didn't look at it. She knew, somehow, that its value was more than monetary. It was an act of penance. As they prepared to leave, Julian stood and, for the first time, properly offered his mother his arm. He didn't just present it as an obligation. He moved closer, waiting for her to find it, guiding her hand to his elbow with a newfound patience. As he led her through the maze of tables, Mr. Sterling, the old diplomat, rose from his seat. He stood not to block their path, but to honor it. He looked directly at Julian, his eyes kind but unflinching. "Young man," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a lifetime of observation. "Your mother is not a memory of a place you left behind. She is your homeland. Tend to it." Julian stopped. He swallowed hard, a muscle working in his jaw. He couldn't form a reply. He simply gave a stiff, formal nod of acknowledgement, a gesture of surrender and acceptance. Then he guided his mother out into the cool embrace of the Chicago night, leaving behind a story that would become a legend in the hushed, hallowed halls of Aurelia. Ilara stood watching them go, the folded check a heavy, significant weight in her apron pocket. It was the key to her Teta's future, but it felt like so much more. It felt like the closing of one book and the terrifying, exhilarating blank first page of another. In the weeks that followed, Ilara discovered that courage has a complex afterlife. At Aurelia, she was no longer just a server. She was a symbol. Staff treated her with a mixture of awe and caution. Patrons who had heard the story requested her section, watching her with a curiosity that made her skin crawl. The job, once a means to a noble end, now felt like a cage, its bars gilded with her newfound fame. The invisible, efficient dance she had perfected was no longer possible. She was visible now, and it was exhausting. The check from Julian Croft sat in her bank account, a monumental sum that both thrilled and terrified her. She had looked at it in the locker room that night, her breath catching in her throat. $20,000. In the memo line, a single, perfectly penned Arabic word, Saber. Patience. It was an acknowledgement, an apology, and a plea, all in one. The money was a bridge to her Teta, but Ilara felt a strange reluctance to use it. It felt like it belonged to the woman she had been for one night, not the woman who now had to wake up every morning. One evening, as she was setting a table, David informed her she had a visitor. In the restaurant's quiet, wood-panelled library bar, Arthur Sterling sat waiting. He rose as she entered, his smile putting her immediately at ease. "Ilara," he said, forgoing any formality. "I apologize for seeking you out, but I was compelled. I haven't stopped thinking about that evening." "It's kind of you to say so, sir," she murmured, perching on the edge of a leather armchair. "Arthur, please. What I witnessed was not just an employee standing up to a difficult customer," he said, leaning forward. "It was an act of profound cultural translation. You didn't just speak a language, you wielded it like a master craftsman. You used it to rebuild a woman's dignity, to remind a man of his own soul. That is not the skill of a server. That is the skill of a diplomat, a storyteller, a healer." He paused, letting the words sink in. "My foundation, the one I mentioned, we spend millions of dollars trying to do what you did with a menu and a memory. We fund programs to help immigrant communities preserve the very things Julian Croft was trying to discard: their stories, their recipes, their poetry, their identity. We are constantly searching for people who are not just bilingual, but bicultural. People who can stand with a foot in each world and bridge the divide." He slid a card across the polished table. It was heavy, cream-colored stock. "This is not a job offer. Not yet. It is an invitation. Come and talk to us. Tell us your grandmother's stories. Tell us about the jasmine in Beirut. We believe that the future is not built by erasing the past, as Mr. Croft once thought, but by weaving it into a stronger, richer fabric. I believe you are one of the weavers, Ilara." Ilara stared at the card, her world tilting on its axis. For 3 years, her future had been a single, narrow path: work, save, rescue. Now, a dozen other paths were branching out before her, leading to places she had never dared to imagine. The first Sunday was a study in excruciating awkwardness. Julian arrived at his mother's apartment on Lakeshore Drive, the bag of groceries feeling like a prop in a play for which he didn't know the lines. Amara greeted him at the door, her face alight with a nervous, hopeful energy that made his guilt churn. The kitchen, once the warm heart of his childhood, felt like a foreign country. It was his mother's domain, filled with scents and tools he didn't understand. "So," he said, setting the groceries on the counter with a thud. "Kibba." Amara smiled, her hands finding the bag of bulgur wheat by touch. "First, you must wash the wheat, and you must wash your hands. My kitchen has rules." For the next 2 hours, they worked in a silence punctuated by her gentle instructions. His hands, accustomed to the smooth glass of a smartphone and the heft of a fountain pen, were clumsy and inept. He mixed the meat and bulgur with too much force, his movements jerky and impatient. Gently. "Habibi," she chided softly, the endearment so unfamiliar it made him flinch. "You are not fighting it. You are persuading it. You must feel it. Your heart must be in your hands." He stopped, his hands covered in the raw mixture. He was failing. Even at this, he was failing. The old, familiar frustration rose in him, the urge to delegate, to optimize, to find a more efficient way. "I can't do this," he muttered, turning to the sink to wash his hands. "It's pointless. We can just buy this from that place on Kedzie Avenue." "We can," Amara agreed, her voice calm. She had not moved from her spot. "But the man on Kedzie Avenue will not tell you about how your grandfather, God rest his soul, would sneak into the kitchen and steal little balls of the filling when he thought I wasn't looking. He will not tell you that the secret to the 7-spice blend is to grind the cloves yourself. He will not hold your hand and tell you that he is proud of you for trying." Julian froze, his back to her. Her words dismantled his anger, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. He turned off the water and slowly turned back around. He saw her standing there, a small, frail woman in a world of darkness, offering him a lifeline back to himself. He walked back to the bowl, plunged his hands back into the meat, and closed his eyes. He focused on the texture, the temperature, the gentle pressure his mother's hands applied next to his as she guided him. He wasn't just making food. He was excavating his own history. 3 months later, Ilara walked through the doors of the Sterling Foundation for Cultural Preservation, not as a visitor, but as its newest program coordinator. Her first project was to develop an oral history archive for the local Lebanese community, a project she called the Jasmine Letters. She spent her days interviewing elders, recording their stories, their songs, their recipes, creating a digital tapestry of a world that was fading. She was giving a voice to the silenced, and in doing so, she had found her own. The visa application for her teta was underway, handled with quiet, terrifying efficiency by Julian Croft's legal team. He had called her once, a brief, formal conversation, to inform her that his lawyers would be in touch. He had been polite, distant, but there was a new humility in his voice. One afternoon, a courier delivered a thick, cream-colored envelope to her desk. Inside was a simple, elegant invitation. "Dear Ilara, my mother and I have spent 12 Sundays in the kitchen. She says my kibbeh is now almost edible. We would be honored if you would be our guest this Sunday for lunch, to render your official verdict. There will be no talk of business. There will be no cell phones. With gratitude, Julian." That Sunday, Ilara found herself back in the elegant high-rise, but the atmosphere was transformed. The apartment was filled with the warm, complex aroma of spices and baked lamb. Amara, looking 10 years younger, greeted her with a hug that smelled of rose water and cinnamon. Julian stood behind her, wearing a flour-dusted apron over a simple shirt. The haunted, hollowed-out look was gone, replaced by a quiet contentment that sat on him more comfortably than his expensive suits ever had. They ate at a small table overlooking the vast, blue expanse of Lake Michigan. The kibbeh was more than edible. It was delicious. But more than the food, Ilara savored the conversation. They didn't rehash the night at Aurelia. Instead, Amara told stories of Beirut, stories that Ilara's teta had also told her, and Julian listened. He didn't just listen politely. He listened with an active hunger, asking questions, filling in the blank pages of his own life. He was no longer erasing his past. He was reclaiming it. After the meal, Amara was led to a worn velvet armchair. From a case beside it, Julian carefully lifted an old oud, its dark wood gleaming. He placed it in his mother's lap. "She has started playing again," he said softly to Elara. "She says her fingers are remembering things her mind forgot." Amara smiled, her fingers finding their place on the strings. She began to play. A melody filled the sunlit room, a sound that was ancient and immediate, a song of longing, of exile, of the unshakable, unbreakable idea of home. It was a sound of sorrow and of joy, tears and laughter, jasmine and snow. As the music washed over them, Elara looked at the scene. The son, watching his mother with an expression of pure, unadulterated love. The mother, lost in her music, her face serene, her world made visible again through sound and memory. And herself, the catalyst, the stranger who had become a friend. She realized then that the revolution at Table 17 hadn't just been about a single night of defiance. It was about the slow, patient and beautiful work of rebuilding. It was the understanding that home wasn't a place you could erase or abandon. It was a melody you carried inside you, a recipe you learned by heart, a language you spoke to find your way back to the people you loved. It was a garden you tended to, together, in the hopes that one day, against all odds, the jasmine would bloom again.